microphone thing because they're recording it for, because I know we're not like in a big giant room, but they're recording it for the cable access. So behave yourself.
Now. I'm going to start now.
Did you want to take your mask off? Like,
Yeah.
You guys are comfortable with us taking the mask off? Is that okay? Yeah?
It'd be easier, I think, to hear. And we got these things turned up to 11. Is that okay, the volume there? Yeah, okay. You probably hear me with that too, right?
Oh, hello. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so cable and his Facebook Live.
Yeah.
So actually, maybe you guys should be loud to pretend like there's.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. Welcome to Boyden Library here in Foxboro. I'm Boston 25's Jason Law. I'm a big fan of horror, and I'm a big fan of this guy, Mr. Paul Tremblay.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah. There's a lot of places to start. Look, we're 10 days away from Halloween. It's a great time of year to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely.
When was the first time you remember being scared from something you saw or read?
Right. So for locals of an age, for me, it was probably a Creature Double Feature on WLVI Channel 56. You know, back when you had to turn the UHF dial. So every Saturday afternoon, it would be, the first movie was like Godzilla Kaiju, and that was the draw, you know, because I love dinosaurs. So Godzilla was like the next step in dinosaurs.
And how old were you here?
I'm gonna say like seven, 8.
Okay.
And then the second movie was typically something that was more of a straightforward horror movie. Usually, you know, be black and white exploitation movies like Attack of the Giant Leeches, Attack of the Killer Shrews, anything with attack in the title. Mm-hmm. But those, I mean, they're silly now watching these movies now, but those movies terrified me. I remember having Attack of the Killer Shrews nightmares, which is really bad. But the ending to that movie is it's really like a survival horror moment where these people are on this random island. There's these giant shrews. If you ever Googled a picture of like these ridiculous looking puppets that look like giant cats with big teeth. I guess that looks like a tiger or a lion, but they didn't look like a tiger or a lion. But anyway, they built like this tin thing, almost like a mini tank, and just put it around them and tried to slowly walk to the water, and like the shrews were digging underneath. So I don't know, as a kid, I don't know, those are the things that like get you as a kid, like playing lava on the floor, right? Like if it's
right, can't touch the floor, right, right.
You know, scary too. But for me, I think the biggest scare that lingered was Jaws when I was 11. There's a couple of people in the audience who know my father. So my father sold this movie to me. He's like, hey, they're showing this movie at, you know, at the high school on the big screen. He's like, oh, this movie, you know, it's really exciting. It's like, there's a scene in this movie that gets what it feels like to catch a fish, like no other movie I've ever seen. That was how he pitched Jaws.
That's one way, that's one synopsis.
He was right, like the scene where Quint first hooks Jaws, like where he's looking at the line, it like just ticks, and then he catches it. It's like, oh yeah, that is like fishing. But then giant sharks and biting. I legitimately had shark nightmares for 10 years.
Is it true that you still can't watch Quint in his demise today?
Yeah,
Really?
I've probably seen the movie 50 times. It's not an exaggeration. Probably even more at this point, because I watch it at least once every summer and usually some other time during the year. But yeah, like even when I've watched it with my children, like we ceremoniously cover our heads. Did Emma? Emma might not have. She's my daughter. Either Cole or Emma didn't actually cover, they watched. But for me, it's almost like worse because I'm listening to him scream. But I'm just like afraid, even though I know it wouldn't, because I've seen many more gory things, but I'm just more afraid of that moment that broke my brain. Like, oh man, what if that happens again? I don't want another 10 years of shark nightmares.
The Robert Shaw scream, I mean, he was so good at dying, wasn't he? I mean, some actors I think really have a hard time with dying on camera. Robert Shaw just nailed it in the blood splurt and everything.
That was what got me as the kid, was the blood splurt.
Yeah.
Because I so cared about that character.
I cried.
Yeah.
I screamed, yeah. And it was like PG, wasn't it? It was before,
it
wasn't an R rating.
It was, that movie resulted eventually in a PG-13. That was really one of the ones they used as examples for the MPA board.
Not for kids.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it was PG.
Your first published book was The Little Sleep.
The Little Sleep.
Right?
Yeah, first novel.
First novel.
Yeah, I'd had a couple of short story collections with very small publishers, but yes.
Okay, but that, yeah, that was your first novel. That kind of was your entry into novel writing.
Right.
Published novel writing. I've read it. It's delightful. If you haven't read it, the dialogue's funny. It's a great story, but it's not horror. It's a detective story. It's like neo-noir, and it takes place in South Boston. Like I said, it's the characters. I was surprised how much I enjoyed the dialogue and the characters. So I would highly recommend it. It's for sale on the back table. But again, it's not horror. So at what point, when I was reading, I was surprised. I was wondering to myself, because it's so different, when did you decide to pivot to scary stuff?
So weirdly, like The Little Sleep was more my pivot because I'd first started messing around with writing in the mid-90s, but for, I don't know, for the first handful of years, it was very much a hobby. I was teaching myself how to play guitar too, and honestly, even if I had a time machine, I think if I could go back and become like a punk star, a guitar god kind of thing, I would choose that. But alas, I found out I was a better writer than a musician. But anyway, so, you know, for the 10 years that I wrote before I wrote The Little Sleep, almost everything I wrote all the short stories I wrote were horror. But every time I tried to write a longer novel or a longer piece, it tended to be more like darkly humorous. I'm not quite sure why, but I mean, it's sort of, in retrospect, it kind of makes sense because to me, horror and humor are like two sides of a coin. Like you can react to the world's ridiculousnesses by either, you know, screaming and recoiling in horror or laughing sort of ruefully. So yeah, with The Little Sleep, I just had this strange idea of the opening chapter, which is a stereotype of a big city PI. A beautiful woman walks into his office, but she has a really strange case. She holds up her fingers and says, and there are bandages around the bases of her fingers. And she tells the detective, someone stole my fingers and replaced them with somebody else's fingers. You have to find them for me. When I first had that chapter, I did try to make it like a weird science fiction horror Philip K. Dick thing and didn't go anywhere. But then when I sort of just stumbled across narcolepsy, like when I was researching another medical affliction, not a pastime, but for a different horror story, I was like, then I didn't know about narcolepsy in that detail. And so it's like, it made sense. That's not what happened. He was sleeping. And so it sort of went for there. So what was weird for me was like when that book was coming out, first novel, I'm being introduced as Paul Tremblay crime writer. I'm like, who's that? I felt like a poser.
So I guess the question is, if you were writing horror short stories before that, did you feel like did you feel out of place writing The Little Sleep? Like it wasn't your niche?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, I felt comfortable with the characters, but sort of the genre of crime, like I'd read a bunch of crime, so I did way more research into crime than I did for narcolepsy. One, at that point in 2007 when I wrote it, we didn't know a lot about narcolepsy. In fact, really, I couldn't find a single nonfiction book solely about narcolepsy. The only one I could find was a self-published memoir by someone who lived in Texas who had like the worst type of narcolepsy that you could have. So actually, I used that for my narcolepsy pretty much. But more research went into just reading Raymond Chandler and reading his letters and reading other sort of 1930s noir. So for me, that was most nervous about the crime.
And I can't think of a protagonist in anything, a main character with narcolepsy. I can't. It's
such old cartoon Beetle Bailey is the only sort of one I could think of. But that's a caricature. It's like the joke was, he was in the army, he'd fall asleep. It was like, a newspaper cartoon. So it was like 3 panels.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was the only one I knew of.
Yeah, that was your basis for research, right?
Yeah.
Head Full of Ghosts. Okay, so you start writing that. Yeah. I guess that you felt a little bit more locked in when you wrote that. I've listened to interviews where you talk about that was like I don't know what the word you used, but eureka moment. You just felt like you had this idea and you just went to it. Right. And it was a quick write for you, right? Didn't you say it only took you about 9 months?
Yeah, that definitely went fairly quickly. And I remember it vividly. It was February of 2013, and I was 100 pages into a different novel that I was really struggling on. It has a great title, though. That novel was called Charles Manson Doesn't Answer My Letters. And it was sort of like going to be a weird sort of semi-humorous thing about a eighth grader writing letters to Charles Manson. And this is like 2000 whatever.
Where is that? Where is the book?
It's my new publisher thought it was too YA, so I never continued with it.
Okay. Which
is fine. I don't know, maybe someday, but I don't know. So anyway, like as far as my agent was concerned, I was working on this Manson book. But then the idea for A Head Full of Ghosts just literally landed in my lap, and it came from reading a book of essays about The Exorcist, mainly the movie. To me, that was just, that's the scariest movie ever. And these essays, really not only broke down the film, but broke down the time period it's in and talked about the cultural impact and, the cultural messages. I was like, wow, I never really thought of the movie in those terms. And I was like, how would I write an exorcism story? And instantly I was like, I would want to write a secular, skeptical version. And then I had the idea with the reality TV crew, et cetera. But once I got into writing a novel, I knew I had to play it like, super ambiguously. So the only part I was nervous, because I felt very good about the book, but I was most nervous the summer of 2013 when my agent said, hey, how's that other book going? Like, I gave up on it, but I have 100 pages of this. So I felt a little nervous about that.
And they liked it?
Well, actually, he didn't. He didn't understand the first 100 pages, which I totally get. One, he wasn't.
Are they basically the same 100 pages in the book that exists now?
Pretty much.
Okay.
But so there's a blog. One of the initial blog posts is missing, because I had put that in the middle. That was the only thing that changed from like draft to the finish. But he wasn't really steeped in horror, and he's like, oh, maybe this should be in third person, and to his defense, he didn't. I knew what the rest of the story was going to be. He didn't. So it was kind of hard to be like, well, it's going to pivot here shortly.
Yeah, it's like watching the first 30 minutes of a movie. It's hard.
Like, and actually, it bummed me out. Like for a week, I was like, oh man, am I going to quit this? Am I going to fire my agent? What am I going to do? And I was like, I believe in this book. I'm going to write it, and then I'll deal with it. And again, to my agent's vast credit, as soon as he read the whole manuscript, he was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So to me, that ranks in my. I'm sure you'll ask about King later, but. Yeah. That moment when my agent was like, I was wrong, this is great. To me, that ranks in the top 3 writing moments for me, because I was really sort of, I was really crushed by like how The Little Sleep didn't sell, and there was it was really more the follow-up too, like that first experience with publishing was really bad, didn't go well. Henry Holt was a mess at the time too, so it's not all my fault. Mm-hmm. That really threw my confidence for a loop, and I was angry and bitter at publishing for 2 years, and that's no way to be. So I feel like with A Head Full of Ghosts, when that idea hit me was when I let go of all those feelings of pettiness and jealousy. And I don't think it's a secret, I don't think it's unrelated that happened. So like just the whole writing of that book really changed everything for me, not only like as a writer, but personally too.
You talked about The Exorcist. I really want to ask you about that, because there's an essay in the back of Head Full of Ghosts. You talked about conservative horror versus progressive horror.
Right.
And I don't want to butcher this. I'll let you explain it. But I guess your idea is basically true horror, or at least the horror you like, is progressive. Talk about that a little bit, and how because you use The Exorcist as a good example.
Right. Yeah. So like when I talked about like progressive in structure, or compared to conservative in structure, and not even necessarily. I'm not necessarily talking about the politics. I have my own politics, as I'm sure you do as well. But to me, a progressive story structure is a story that reflects that things change, that things will never be the same again. Whereas a conservative story structure, which is very popular, and I totally understand why, is that you go through the story and then the status quo is reestablished, or it's a happy ending where like everyone's unscathed, or the experience they went through doesn't leave scars, and that's not reality. And most of the stuff I like to read, even if it's horror or science fiction, or I like it rooted in some sort of reality. So I mean, to me, that's just the truth of things, whether you want it to or not. Things change, you change based on your experiences. Well, sorry. Yeah. You mentioned The Exorcist. My beef with the movie The Exorcist, because it's super scary and it's very effective, but maybe we shouldn't call it the ending. Maybe we should call it the denouement. I don't know. But after spoiler alert, Father Karras goes down the stairs, he's dead. The movie ends with it's sunshine, and Reagan doesn't remember anything, and she's even looked almost fully healed, and she kisses the priest, and everyone's happy. And so it's like, no, that family would be fundamentally changed by the event they went through. And I wanted to know what that story was.
I don't know what the ending could have been, but it almost undermines everything you've seen before. It's not scary. Like you said, the ending of The Exorcist is not scary. The ending of Halloween is terrifying, because he looks down and Michael Myers is gone. We don't know where he is, and that's a beautiful ending. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he's swinging the chainsaw, he's wielding it around, and then it just goes to black. I mean, that stuff's terrifying because they're still out there. But you're right. It was kind of an unambiguous ending. Yeah,
so I'm not sure how they would change it too. I mean, I wanted something that would reflect that, so that part's been defeated, but these people are gonna have to live with what they experienced or what they saw for the rest of their lives. How do you reflect that in some way? I'm not quite sure. Yeah. That's why in my book, I have the attempted exorcism happening at the 2/3 point, because I was really interested, and I hope a lot of the book story would sort of hinge on the fulcrum of, all right, what does the family do now that they've been through this?
So let's talk about Stephen King.
Okay. Uncle Steve.
Yeah, he's had a huge influence on your career. And I'll say this, the thing I love about Stephen King is that he's look, a lot of horror fans and people, on Facebook groups and everything, they're like, Stephen King posts, we're sick of Stephen King. You go to the bookstore, he's got 4 shelves, maybe there's 2 on the bottom for some other authors. And I get it. A lot of people want to promote other authors and get other people in the mix, but he's been it's like Tiger Woods with golf, he raised the sport, he got there was more money, there was more attention in golf, and he's been such a great endorser and figurehead, and he's advocate for up and coming writers. So talk about the tweet in 2015.
Yeah, August 19th, 2015. So A Head Full of Ghosts had come out, I think it was June 3rd, 2015. Like any horror writer worth their salt, I was like, oh, I got to try to get the book to Stephen King somehow. And at that point in my career, just from having like dumbly hung around long enough, I did know a lot of people in sort of different places just from going to conventions and doing some things like helping them run the Shirley Jackson Awards. So I've been around long enough that I put in my time, so I feel like it wasn't like some of it was still luck, but also I felt like some of the work that I'd done previously I think helped to get the book into his hands. Anyway, when I tried going through his assistant, she was like, hey, this book sounds great, but to be honest with you, he's got this giant room filled with like thousands of books. He walks through it occasionally and picks one out.
Wow.
We can put it in there, but like, good luck.
It makes sense, yeah.
So then like about a month into the summer, I heard from a couple of friends / acquaintances in the writing community who said, oh yeah, we really love the book. And they were friends with Steve and said, yeah, we told him, you got to read this. So 2 different people. So I was like, ooh, maybe I have a shot. Maybe he's going to read it. Another month or so goes by. So now it's like late August. I still teach high school. I was, high school math. So like any kid, I'm super depressed by the end of August. August is the Sunday of months, right? And that night we had just bought like a new table, so we were moving furniture. It was hot and I was cranky. It was like 7 p.m. And then my phone just started going crazy, blowing up. Because friends had seen the tweet before I did and texted it to me.
Do you remember what time it was? What time
it was
the tweet was
a
sent?
little bit after 7. I don't remember the exact time of the tweet, but when I went and saw his tweet, I got teary-eyed. I started reading because of King. Never mind becoming a writer. So I instantly stopped moving furniture. Pulled a 6-pack of adult beverages out of the fridge and just sat down and opened my laptop and just watched people react to the tweet.
Did you get emotional because of the fact that he took the time to do that in the recognition of a hero of yours, or was it partially because you knew your life was probably changed forever after that?
It was more the first. It was hard to know if the latter would happen. It definitely did. I think just the language of the tweet resonated, and really even the timing of it was because now it was almost like September, October season, and the book just had an incredible second life, and it still has this weird tale where it still sells. Not very many books that are 6 years old, still sell.
Yeah.
Not crazy amounts, but decent amounts. So I don't know. Thanks to him, I have a cult hit. So I had no idea. I was just Stephen King. Holy crap! I was just really excited.
When you think of your career, and so The Little Sleep comes out, what you said, 07? 08?
I wrote it. Started in 07.
Okay. But from that time to 2015, that's, if you think about some writers who struggle for years and years and years, you must feel so fortunate in hindsight that you're able to break through like that.
No, definitely. That was all rolled into, I just wanted to believe that I would get a second chance if I was good enough. Listen, I'm obviously a middle-aged, cisgendered white male, so I have a certain privilege that, maybe we get more second shots than other writers do. But typically in publishing, if your first books tank, the big publishers aren't going to try with you again. I'd say it's even more true today. If you don't earn out your advance, you're poison to them. To the point where I've had friends had to go to pen names because they have to try a different name with this next book.
Wow. Kind
of thing. So I knew all that was going to be a hurdle for A Head Full of Ghosts. My agent was very upfront about that too. It's this is a great book, but it's probably going to be a little bit tricky because of your previous sales record. And even early in the submission process to editors, we had 7 editors interested, almost within 2 weeks. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And my agent tried to set up an auction. It's it's a little dicey, but we'll try and set it up. So I went into a weekend thinking, oh my God, auction, this is it. And then after the weekend on Tuesday, all 7 had backed out. And I know that more than half of them had their sales team say, his previous record isn't good. No. The other half horror doesn't sell, because there really wasn't, other than King at that time. The year before there was Bird Box. Mm-hmm. But that hadn't really translated to other people horror sales.
Yeah, that was a big book.
That was one of my lower moments, was after those 7 editors passed. I remember playing ping pong with my son in the basement. He would hit the ball would hit me in the chest, and then a second later I would swing my paddle. But we said, we'll try again. A week and a half later, my current editor, it only takes one, Jennifer Brell, who's a huge editor. She edits Joe Hill, Neil Gaiman, Neil Stephenson. She liked it. we had like one quick phone call. She asked if I would change one little thing. I was like, hell yeah. And like 2 days later, I was coaching a JV basketball game. It was halftime. I got a text from my agent with the new deal. Yeah.
Awesome.
That was a sweet moment, a top 5 moment too, for sure.
I want to talk about Paul Bear's Club in a second. I'll move off A Head Full of Ghosts in a minute, but I do want to ask you one last question, because you've said before that A Head Full of Ghosts is like your thesis on what you like about horror and what you don't like about horror. So what don't you like about the horror genre?
Well, I mean, like I sort of treat it like, you know, I'm a Boston sports fan. I love my teams, but I'm also going to criticize them too. Like, I love horror. To me, I think horror can get at the stickiest questions that art poses in the most interesting ways. But like, I really don't like the horror that I think is, you know, lazy or you know, it's not to say we can't have fun horror. I mean, Evil Dead 2 is one of my favorite movies. I mean, that's just fun. But there's something about the kinetic energy of that movie too. I don't know. I think horror had, particularly from the 80s and into the 90s, a well-earned reputation for a lot of those works being, you know, misogynistic, homophobic, you know, etc. So yeah, like I'm.
So you don't like the
those, you know?
A lot of people don't admit to liking the exploitation stuff, but they do like the exploitation stuff. But is that the type of stuff that bothers you?
Yeah, I mean, partly because it does like the super violent stuff just gets to me. Like gore scares me. It bothers me.
So you're not a Saw guy. You're not.
No, never seen Saw. Don't plan on it.
Okay.
I'm much more like, in terms of movies, I'm much more, I guess, shade towards like supernatural or psychological. But I mean, everything. I mean, but that's not like a hard and fast rule. You mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's a brilliant movie. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. There's great stuff in almost every subgenre.
So yeah, to me, there's no hard and fast rules, and that's another cool thing about horror to me is that part of it. It's like every time you think you're sick of something, and I actually wrote The Cabin at the End of the World, because I got this idea for a home invasion story. I'm like, oh, I hate home invasion stories. I'm like, okay, Big Mouth, how would you write one? And that's how that book started.
It was a challenge to yourself to say, okay, I don't really like this part of the genre. So let's tackle it. Yeah. Yeah. And do you think you were successful with it? Did you enjoy the process?
Yeah, I'm very happy with that book. That book is in my like personal list for my own stuff. That's very close to A Head Full of Ghosts. That book means a lot to me. I'm very protective of that book.
Yeah.
And its ending, because I know a lot of people don't like its ending.
Right. All right. We talked about that earlier. Well, okay. What do you tell people who ask you about the ending?
Well, I mean, because I don't want to spoil it, but like.
No spoilers.
Yeah. So I will say this: there's a central ambiguity to the story, of whether or not the apocalypse is sort of the stakes. Like, is the apocalypse going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Based on things that are happening in the novel. I mean, that's one of like the scary things that's introduced. But to me, at some point, the story, for me, stopped being about whether or not the world was really ending or not. It didn't ultimately matter. The story became about something else. And I don't necessarily want to say what that something else is without spoiling it. But it was really central to, I guess, the choice a couple of characters had to make. That was the story to me. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, not everyone's going to like every book. And it's kind of like a friend pointed out this to me recently. It's like, oh, yeah, that's weird. Like, I'm at this weird point. It seems weird to me where I've had enough books put out there that people are like, oh, yeah, it's my favorite. Tremblay, that's my least favorite. Like, I still feel like I'm like totally new and I don't know what I'm doing. But I have enough books out there where that's, yeah. Like, I talk about like King and Straub and Jackson and Barker, like that way, like this is my favorite of theirs.
But that's got to be so great, though.
It is, yeah, no, it is very cool.
I mean, I'm sure you're creative, so you have to put yourself out there, and it's going to hurt. You know, all creative people are going to have to. But that's got to be so wild to think that you have debates. I mean, we just went to dinner before we were here, talking about John Carpenter versus Wes Craven and stuff, and it's got to be crazy to think that there's some kids out there doing the same with your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So when like I'm trying to do stories or write stories, I try to remember one thing from I call him my mentor. He's also a really good friend, Stuart Ernan, who has co-written a couple things with Stephen King. After A Head Full of Ghosts, I was writing Disappearance at Devil's Rock, and it felt like it was a really hard write. It wasn't going well, it wasn't going easy. And I wrote an email to Stuart, like, wow, this is so hard. Like, I don't know if this is going to be as good as A Head Full of Ghosts. And I was, looking for a pep talk, essentially. I emailed it to him. And he emailed back one line, not everything you write's going to be great. And I burst out laughing, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. Honestly, that like lifted all this pressure that I was putting on myself. It's like, you know what? I'm just going to try to make this book the best it can be. That's all I really should be worrying about.
What's your writing process like? Like, does it take, I know Thomas Harris, it takes like a decade for him to write a novel. I mean, I think a lot of George R.R. Martin, I mean, I feel like it takes a lot out of him.
Yeah.
What's your process?
So typically for like a novel, it takes me about 12 to 15 months. And that doesn't count like the edits from the editor or stuff like that, because that's usually here. You get like 2 weeks to make changes. I wish I had more time sometimes, but I feel lucky that I do have 12 to 15, because I know some writers have to spit them out like less than a year.
Well, I mean, you're friends with a lot of writers. Is that a long time? Is that about right? I mean, is it? I know the processes are probably all over the map.
All over the map. I mean, I want Megan Abbott's career. She comes out with a book every 2 years. That seems like humane to me,
Mm-hmm.
or more reasonable. Not only just from the writing side of things, but also, I don't know, I feel like the way books are sort of presented and published, like a year, like people, with the Case of a Head Full of Ghosts, a year later, people are still, that was the book they were discovering. You know, not this new one, Disappearance of Devil's Rock. I kind of felt like that book didn't have any sort of room to breathe on its own kind of thing. So ever since, it's almost been like we've squeezed a short story collection in between, but It's been like 2 years between.
You think that's
novels, because I think readers get excited, oh, here comes another novel. Like, you know, I've already spent a year blabbing about this one novel. Now, bam, here comes another one. No, I think it's nice to have a little bit of a...
So you think that's the sweet spot,
yeah,
about 2 years?
I think so. But I mean, there are plenty of writers who do one a year. Well, my friend Stephen Graham Jones, I think he writes a book every month.
Yeah.
He's so talented, incredibly prolific.
Does it take a lot out of you? I mean, when you're sitting down at the keyboard, does it, do you lose yourself? Do you forget like time? I mean, I've heard stories about, just getting inside the story and stuff. I mean, what happens to your brain?
I mean, that's the cool part. If those days where you do lose time, those are good days. It's like, oh yeah, I just totally fell into it. But I don't know how often that happens, but a lot of days it's work. It's like I have to force myself to sit there and, try not to like go onto Twitter or something else.
Yeah. So some days it's just not there.
Yeah, but like I have to force myself. Like that's one of the hardest things for any writers. Like the idea that you just can't rely on, like if you want a career, you just can't rely on like the good days. You kind of have to write on the bad days too. And a lot of times, those bad days are when the really good stuff gets written. I think the good days sort of coincide with maybe the easier parts of the book. Another writer friend of mine who's a genius, Michael Sisko, he's like the American Kafka. It's a crime that more people don't get to read him. But he talks about, like, he doesn't believe in writer's block. He thinks if you get that point, that means, you are at the breakthrough point. You are at the point where something great is going to happen. And I sort of love that idea. That the best stuff is going to come from sort of like the hardest struggle of it.
Do you ever feel guilty when you have, because you have other writer friends, you feel like, because you just mentioned your friend who you wish more people got his to read his work. Do you ever feel guilty by the success that you have?
Yeah, I do. A short answer would be yeah.
I think that's normal. I mean, I think that would be human.
Yeah, I mean, because I have friends who are I would say they're more talented than I am, better writers. Went to school, for English and writing, and so much of it is persistence and patience and hard work. Which I would not take that away from myself.
And talent,
too. Yeah, and there's talent too, but there just are so many talented people. Even with a little sleep, I think that's a really cool idea. I think just the time it came out was bad timing. Part of it. In the second book, when that was released, Amazon was fighting with my publisher. In the release week of the second book, Amazon took all books off their website, so no one could buy my book for a week. So it's like things like that can just so easily undermine you, or if your editor leaves, like things that are beyond your control. So that's the hard part. So I was at least just, I don't know, dumbly persistent enough just to all right, fine, even though I'm angry and bitter, I'm just going to keep going. Because the idea of being persistent is, if you're persistent, then there's more chance at opportunity. And just, hopefully the odds are in your favor, just need one to hit, or you just need one to break through. But I guess the answer to the short version is, I do feel guilty. I wrote a short story sort of about that guilt that's in Growing Things. Oh my God, I'm going to forget the name of the story. I don't remember the name of the story. It's terrible.
We'll look for it. Is it back there? Somebody got the book. What does your family think about what you do? Your parents?
Yeah, they're very proud. My dad, he wasn't very serious about it, but he used to write some science fiction stories and read them to us. And they were definitely more like YA. One funny anecdote. So he wrote this story that took place on another planet about sort of these, it was almost like a zoo, and it had something to do with the animals, but it was very much like a YA teen kind of story. In like 2005, 2006, I was slush editor or fiction editor for a magazine called Fantasy Magazine. And so I've been doing it for like a year or two. And he's like, hey, how about if I send you that story? I'm like, sure. It's like, I'll show it to the publisher. Like, you know, I was the fiction editor, the publisher is like, you know, we'll see what he says. You know, I can't, you know, I like the story. So I showed it to my editor. He's like, hey, you know, it's good, but, you know, this reads too YA for our magazine. So, you know, I told my father, yeah, sorry.
Oh, man, you had to break the news to your dad.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So, and then I thought he was just like, it's okay. But he was like pissed. Like,
you should have sent him a rejection letter.
Funny, I know. Well, he brings it up. Like, he used to bring it up when I would do readings, and he would show up like, my son rejected me. I'm like, yeah. Now you're banned from submitting ever again.
That's brutal.
No, but my mom is super supportive. I know it's kind of strange for them because I do mine a lot of like autobiographical stuff.
You use your sister's house.
Use my sister's house. I've had older books use my parents'. This newest book is definitely uses pieces of my parents'. But the weird part, like I know it's impossible to see for people in my family that it's not them, even though I'm using things they've said or done or the places they've worked. You know, they become characters to me. It's just that I built them with these different parts.
Were they horror fans? Were they into that stuff?
My mother, definitely not. My dad, he was just a genre fan in general when it came to like film, more so film. Like he was a huge Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien nut. But you know, they had like Stephen King's It in the bookcase. He used to stare at it.
It's a thick one.
But it's a thick one. But like for me, it was like after we talked about my beginning in the 80s, you know, we had HBO earlier than any other town. So HBO, my brother, even though he's 5 years younger, he was watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was like hiding.
Yes.
So, well, I mean, a lot, you know, my brother and I really connected through just watching 80s horror films too.
So I have Shudder. You have Shudder.
Yes.
I was thinking about this. You know, there's many.
Shudder's a streaming service that's just horror, owned by AMC. But they have great stuff.
I didn't know AMC owned it. Yeah, I think it's like $5 a month, but it's strictly all horror stuff. It's stuff you couldn't really find it. You'd have a hard time finding it anywhere else. Barnes & Noble has a horror section now. You got Netflix with all these great miniseries and these great movies. It's so easy to watch horror now. Is this, maybe other than the 80s, the best time to be a fan and a creator of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So the funny thing about the publishing 80s, if you're unaware, like in the 80s, there was a huge horror publishing boom where they were throwing out like $1 million advances, and all these horror books came out. But like with anything, it was a total glut of the market, and a lot of the imitators were just really bad writers, and that market just totally crashed. And I mean, so that crashed like in the late 80s, early 90s. You still see that in publishing. There's still plenty of publishers who are afraid of horror, I think for part of that reason. And even like
because of the crash?
Yeah, I think you're just an institutional memory.
Wow.
Like a lot of books, it's starting to change, but when A Head Full of Ghosts came out, there were no books with horror on the spine. I don't even know if my book had horror on the spine. They would say like psychological suspense or thriller. You know, now you're starting to see other publishers taking advantage of this, like Del Rey, Tor, Nightfire. My novels still don't say horror on the spine. Like my publisher tries to, or at least with the previous two books, they definitely wanted more thriller sort of overlap. His Cabin at the End of the World and Survivor Song. Compressed timelines, I guess, had some thriller elements. So, you know, they pushed like the thriller side of it hard. I mean, I really don't care how you market it. I'm just going to write what I write.
And people will find it, hopefully.
Yeah. The Pallbearers, I tried to warn them that the Pallbearers Club is much different than the previous two. It's much more like, it's almost like The Little Sleep mixed with A Head Full of Ghosts. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit more personal, a little bit more like, I don't want to say meandering, but it's not like the tight, fast-paced thriller sort of plot. So I guess it's more of a mix of literary and horror. So they're going to have to try to go that direction.
Well, all right, let's talk about that then.
Okay.
So the Pallbearers Club, 2022.
Yeah.
I just read the excerpt that's in the paperback edition of Survivor Song. It's awesome. I mean, I loved what I read. It's in Beverly. Is this the second novel in Beverly after A Head Full of Ghosts?
Yeah, Head Full of Ghosts.
Your hometown?
The other novels? Yeah, Head Full of Ghosts is in Beverly, and so is
Yeah.
Pallbearers Club is Beverly and Providence, but yeah, probably an even split, mostly Beverly.
So it's about a kid in 1988 ish at Beverly High School. I mean, does that?
Yeah, sure. So
is that you?
Yeah, it pretty much is. So the book, is presented as like a memoir. And the first line of the novel is, "I am not Art Barbara." It's whoever's writing this book is naming himself Art Barbara for the purposes of the book. I saw the name Art Barbara on a wall in a hotel in Providence, and the name just cracked me up because in a Boston accent, it's like, yeah, Art Barbara. And my agent's last name is Barbara too, so that was kind of funny. Yeah, so it's this memoir by someone, maybe an alternate universe me, total high school loser, suffers from scoliosis and crushing, lack of self-esteem, etc. He decides to, because he realizes, oh, I don't have any extracurricular activities, so he starts what's called the Pallbearers Club, where you volunteer at funeral homes to serve elderly or homeless people who don't have a lot of living relatives. Which is kind of sweet, but also morbid, or a chance to be morbid, right? Because you're around dead people. So he starts this club. He only gets like a couple of high schoolers to join. They don't last very long. This strange older woman joins the club. He's not sure how much older, maybe college age or something. And then she sort of just becomes like this friend slash enemy slash figure throughout the rest of his life, who may or may not be a supernatural, folkloric New England supernatural being. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
So it starts in the late 80s, and the first like 150 pages or so takes place in those late 80s, but then it fast forward to about like, quickly through the 90s to about 2007, and it goes all the way eventually to present time.
Is it cathartic to write about stuff that you lived through? Beverly High School, places that you grew up. I mean, is it fun to go back and revisit that stuff and use it?
I thought it would be. It definitely was fun at times, because this book, I wouldn't call it a horror comedy, because when you say horror comedy, that conjures visions of, I don't know. Typically, if you hear horror comedy, especially when it's a movie, it's the horror elements that are the funny part. I hope that this book is funny when it's supposed to be, and creepy and disturbing when it's supposed to be. So trying to do like two different things.
You do have there is a lot of humor in all your books.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think A Head Full of Ghosts definitely.
And in a good way, because I know a lot, it's really divisive in horror. A lot of people, are kind of fed up with the movies, at least, that have to be horror comedies and everything. But you do have a lot of comedy. Is that, do you strive for that, or is that just Paul Tremblay coming out naturally?
Maybe a little bit of both. With A Head Full of Ghosts, I thought we kind of needed it, because a lot of it was like winking and referencing other things, right? So the fact that like the stuff that happens in the book looks like The Exorcist for a second, and then it looks like Paranormal Activity or other things. You can't help but not have some sort of joke at some point on that. Mm-hmm. Cabin and Cabin in the World for me was probably one of the hardest ones to write, because there's like almost zero humor. It's like one joke.
It's hard to have jokes during a home invasion story.
Yeah. Well, there's like one jokey moment, but otherwise, yeah, it's pretty rough. So this one I was actually excited more for the comedy part of it. I actually had a harder time with the horror. Not the harder time, but that was harder to figure out, like how I was going to have that element work. But yeah, I don't know. The book is, I think it's fun. The publisher's going to do some really cool design elements to it too. Because the character that I mentioned, who joins the club, she comments at the end of every chapter like, this is bullshit, or this is not, sorry.
Cable access, got to bleep it.
And also, like, deeper you get into the book, she actually starts writing comments in the margins, because she found his manuscript. It's like crosses out words, and so that, I think that stuff will be a lot of fun.
You're really good with doing that, with finding, like, you use the blogs, to kind of break up the narrative, and I think Grady Hendrix does other things like that, other kind of devices, I guess would be the best word to describe it.
Different narrative techniques or styles.
Do you try to come up with a different one? Are they natural, or do you try to come up with a kind of a different hook to help sell the narrative a little bit?
I think it's more natural. Like, I'm just really interested. Like, I get excited by those kind of ideas. Like Mark Danielski's House of Leaves, if anyone out there has read that, is one of my favorite books.
Was that the first one you can remember doing something like that?
Yeah, but it's funny, like when you go back, you can see it more often. Even like, in horror, there's the epistolary novel. There's the big grand tradition of a novel told in letters, right? So like the idea that you're using different narrative techniques. And I think for horror in particular is, why not use the modes that people are communicating in now? Like if I'm trying to scare people now, like I'm not trying to scare people 10 years from now. I'm not trying to scare the the mix of cockroach-human hybrid 50 years from now, whatever's going to be left. I'm trying to scare people now who are reading the book. So to me, it only seems natural that you might have some text or a reference to Twitter or something like that.
Well, in Survivor Song too, there's text messages, like you said. There, you can actually see, the shape of a text and an iMessage and
Right.
the bubbles and everything. It's interactive is not the right word because you're not interacting with it, but it's immersive. Maybe that's better.
Yeah, and I think the thing I try to keep in mind is I don't want it to seem like a gimmick. It has to serve a purpose in the story. It has to be there for a reason. It can't just be like, oh, aren't I so clever? I can make all these references or do all these things.
House of Leaves, by the way, if you guys have ever read it, it's kind of a challenging read because there's a lot of footnotes.
Yeah.
But it's about a house that kind of expands, and it doesn't look like the inside doesn't look like the outside, so it's like this whole, and the pages as you're going along, how do you explain it? Like they tell the story with the words on the paper. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Some pages might be spirals of words, or some pages might be mostly blank, but different blocks.
But it goes along with what the characters are doing when they're in a tunnel. It's pretty wild. I read that about 15 years ago. It was pretty.
Yeah.
It was pretty.
That's right. It's like 4 stories within one. This guy is writing the book about. He found a documentary that a blind man made about this house. So it's like 4 different stories in one. It is a long read.
It challenges the reader, I think, is a good way to put it. It's not a easy breezy, but it's a terrific book. I'm going to ask you for your Halloween recommendations at the end of this, but that's one of mine. Do you want to do some speed round questions?
Yeah, sure.
All right. I came up with some speed round questions. I thought this would be a lot of fun.
Speed round questions.
I call this Getting to Know Paul Tremblay.
Oh boy.
All right, here we go. You can take your time answering too. It's not literally speed round. Favorite Halloween candy?
Snickers.
Okay. Halloween candy you will not touch.
Well, this probably doesn't even count. Like black licorice. So is that like Mike and Ike? Is that like black licorice?
Flavored, yeah, but I know what you mean. The black licorice.
And I'll also throw candy corn. Like I'm not candy corn.
That's a new Paul Thomas Anderson movie? Isn't it called Black Licorice?
Yeah.
Licorice Pizza. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, for a record. Yeah. Smarties. I never understood Smarties.
I ate those as a kid. Like I was definitely all sugar guy, like Nerds, Smarties. Yeah, I would eat all that stuff.
You are a breakfast cereal guy. What's your favorite breakfast cereal?
Honeycomb.
Okay, that's the #1 seed?
That is the #1 seed.
Okay, what's a breakfast cereal you'll pass right by in the grocery store? Never touch.
Anything with marshmallows, like that's over the line for me. Like
you mean like Lucky Charms?
Lucky Charms, yeah. You can't have marshmallows in cereal.
Is it because
I'll eat like the sugariest cereal. And also, no chocolate cereals, like no Cocoa Puffs. Like I have this weird thing with chocolate. Like I like chocolate, but it has to be chocolate. It can't be like a chocolate flavored thing.
Is it because it gets the milk all kind of gross looking too?
Yeah, if it's chocolate, it has to be chocolate. I can't eat chocolate flavored things. Like I don't even like chocolate ice cream that much. Like sorry, I'm weird.
Favorite place to write?
Oh, I think what served me well is I don't have one. Like because
it's your mobile.
Especially when I was starting out, like when my son Cole was born, like I was trying my best not to take time away from him, so I would write when he napped, or actually I got a lot of writing done at school where the kids would take a quiz. Like, all right, I get 45 minutes. They could be cheating, I don't know, but I would be working on a story. I mean, honestly, that's like I just through sheer like training, I became good at if I get an hour, this is when it's going to happen. So, I mean, if I had a preference, I suppose quiet room. My little writing area at home, but it's never quiet. So
I think so. Stephen King's son Joe Hill has talked about writing longhand. Can you do that?
I can't do. I wish I could. I can't. I have to type.
Why do you wish you? Why do you wish you?
Spacing, because then I wouldn't have to lug the laptop around. It'd be just great to open up the notebook and be like, oh, I know the perfect sentence that I'm going to write. Like now, if I tried it, and it's like, oh, scratch.
I feel like your hand would cramp up after a certain amount of time.
Well, one of my best friends writes longhand. John Langan, who's an amazing writer. He writes longhand first. Because he's too smart. Too smart. He's no good.
Favorite local restaurant?
Ooh, my wife would kill me for not saying D'Angelo, so I'm not going to. She works with D'Angelo Papagino's. Happy birthday, Papagino's, by the way. It's their 60th birthday. Favorite local restaurant? I'm going to give a shout out to a new restaurant that I really like. How's that? Because we ate out way too much. I think we kept some restaurants going during the pandemic by ordering DoorDash from them.
That's good. That's
absurd.
Good. They needed it, yeah.
The Northern Spy in Canton is a really cool new restaurant. They just built like some stuff in it's like a Paul Revere area they call it or something.
Okay.
But Northern Spy, I believe that's a type of apple. Any apple experts out there? Northern Spy.
Okay. How many books a year do you read?
I read on a good year between like maybe 80 or 90. So I'd say this year is probably going to be down to like 70-ish or so.
Down to 70, okay. My goal this year was 30, and I hit it, so I'm happy about that. But
I do squeeze in some little books, and I count those sometimes.
Okay.
Not kids' books, though.
So on that note, 70 to 90 books a year. Book you want to see adapted for TV or film that hasn't been yet, yours don't count.
Mine don't count.
No.
Oh, well, I mentioned John Langan, so I'd love to see his novel, The Fisherman.
Oh, yeah, I've heard good things about that. I just saw someone on Instagram writing about that.
Yeah, there was someone who was a really big director that I think most people have heard of, was briefly interested in it, but for whatever reason it didn't happen. It would kind of be an expensive book to do because there's a time jump and there's a sort of giant monster thing at the end too. But that'd be a wonderful thing to see.
Okay. Best Simpsons Treehouse of Horror segment.
Oh, best segment. Well.
Have you seen them all?
I probably stopped around like 10,
Me too.
12, et cetera. But
are they up to like 29 or something? I guess there's been one for every season.
My favorite.
Is it already? That makes sense. Yeah.
It might be all in the same episode, but my favorite episode is the Toaster is the Time Traveler.
Okay. Yeah.
Amazing. I think in the same one, Willie is Nightmare on Elm Street.
That was okay. So that was my two. My one is the Shinning.
Oh, the Shinning.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can I have the Shinning? But the best quote from that Simpsons of the Nightmare on Elm Street is, they're going in for a meeting. It's like, oh, it's freezing, and the calendar says Smarch because they couldn't afford a regular calendar. So and Homer's like, ooh, lousy Smarch weather. And I say that every year.
That's the part you remember?
Well, then he turns up the thermostat and it burns Willie, and Willie becomes
right.
Krueger. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Most overrated horror movie.
Oh. Most overrated horror movie.
Like you just can't understand, guys. It's not that good.
Yeah. Well, most recently for me, I really did not like Midsommar. I think a lot of people really like that one. I don't love the Conjuring series either.
Yeah.
That might be an age thing because I was like, I've seen this all before.
And it's too much, for me, it's too much CGI.
Yeah, and if I understand if I was a teen seeing it, like, oh, that's super scary, but having seen The Exorcist and everything else, the Conjuring didn't feel like it was anything new to me.
Okay.
Also, I don't like the Warrens being painted as these great people. They were con artists and preyed on people in real life. That bothers me.
Good answer. Favorite band that is not punk?
Oh, man. So I can't go to metal then, huh?
Why not? You can't go.
Oh, okay.
I thought I knew the answer to this one.
Oh, I was going to say Helmet.
Oh, yeah,
they're
right.
metal-ish.
Aren't you friends with the singer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and Clutch, I guess. Well, Clutch started off as sort of punk. What did you think my answer was going to be?
Metallica.
Oh, no. My brother was all Metallica. So even if I like some of their stuff, I wouldn't admit it because my brother liked them. Sorry.
I don't think it gets better than
Although
Metallica.
I have played For Whom the Bell Tolls at my high school's talent show, the school I teach at. So I like some Metallica.
All right, Stephen King section here. Favorite King?
Favorite King. That's hard for a novel. That's man.
Have you really read all his stuff?
There's a few that I haven't read. I don't think I've read Dolores Claiborne. I don't think I've read Blaze.
Because you said on a podcast that there was like a 2-year period after you read The Stand that you just kind of burned through all his stuff.
Yeah, so that was in the 90s.
Okay, so it was probably half the amount that it is today.
So
okay.
yeah, I'd say certainly post 92 or pre 92, I've read all of those.
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to beat The Stand just because it was the first thing that I've read. But I really love his short story collections, like maybe Skeleton Crew or Night Shift.
Yeah.
Or even like Dreamscapes and Nightmares. I think it's an underrated one.
I think all his short story collections. I've never read one of his short story collections and been disappointed. And I told you earlier, I think the shorter stuff is what the stuff I gravitate to. All right, so most disappointing or least favorite out of his bibliography?
You're going to make me say something bad about Uncle Steve?
I know.
I know he doesn't like Tommyknockers. I actually kind of like its bonkersness. I guess Insomnia was probably the hardest to read.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's a long book.
Well, if the guy who wrote the book is telling you this is not a good book, Tommyknockers, then it's probably not great.
So I know, he's talked about. I don't think he remembers parts of reading that book where he was sort of struggling with his addictions.
Yeah.
So I don't think he has much of a memory of that book.
When was the last time you read Tommyknockers?
So I read that that was probably my initial first. And Dreamcatcher. I don't think he doesn't like that one either.
No, he doesn't.
I can comfortably say, Dreamcatcher.
There you go. Smart. Okay, best Stephen King adaptation.
Oh, I now think it's So we're going to go with best adaptation. The Shining movie I love. The book is, but they're so different. So I'm going to go with the one that the both are so close. They're very close to each other. Is The Dead Zone.
Yeah.
I think that's the best adaptation. I rewatched that recently with my daughter, who's a junior in high school, and she loved it. I was really, I was wondering, would this be dated or not? But no, she was totally into it. And that book has so many echoes of what happened politically, with Trump here, and Stilson is sort of the obvious comparison. And to watch it now, never mind read it, it is sort of like very strange. Like, wow, that's who we elected.
Shawshank for me. Shawshank. I think that's the best movie. It's not a horror movie, obviously, if you've read the book or anything, but it's actually really close to the novella that he wrote.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
There's not a lot of differences. Did I ask you worst adaptation? Worst adaptation. There's like 105 of them.
I know. I'm gonna forget one of them. But like the miniseries of The Shining probably jumps out.
Oh, I like that one. I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, the guy from Wings was in it, so that wasn't.
But I was a kid when I watched it. It was on, I think, in '97.
Oh, yeah,
I was like 13 or 14.
I think seen it as an adult. I was like, ah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have one?
Well, the ones, I mean, there's like a whole thing with, there's so many ones that just didn't work, but there's like the Lawnmower Man, which takes his property, but it's not, it has nothing to do. So there's that. Children of the Corn is kind of similar, right? They're like an IP, but they're nothing to do with the short story. So there's those that suck. But then there's like the, what was the one he did with Maximum Overdrive?
Yeah.
That's a tough watch. Actually, it's kind of fun to watch because it's so bad, but it's, I mean, there's.
This is one movie that he's directed himself, was Maximum Overdrive.
I think it was the last time he directed too.
Yeah, about it. All the cars and trucks come alive.
Yeah, the ATM machine, lawnmowers start killing people. Subject or monster you'd like to see Stephen King tackle that he hasn't tackled yet?
Hasn't he tackled? I was going to say Giant Monster, but I guess that was The Mist, right? I don't know.
He's done zombies, right? Because
yeah, Cell, which I didn't read though.
Yeah. And Pet Sematary. They were kind of zombies.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's hit most of the tropes. Cycle the Werewolf for Werewolf.
Vampires, Salem's Lot.
Yeah.
I guess he has. Maybe he's hit them all. Yeah. He didn't do a killer shark, did he?
No. Yeah, it's kind of hard to do a killer shark now, though.
All right, John Carpenter here. This is the John Carpenter section. Favorite Carpenter movie that's not The Thing or Halloween? I'm taking out the obvious answers. Big Trouble in Little China? Yeah, good one. Yeah. Good one. I think that might be mine. That or The Fog. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, The Fog. I'm wearing the John Carpenter shirt. I somehow got bamboozled into, I'm doing a podcast debate. I'm picking John Carpenter, and I have to debate against someone who's picked Wes Craven. I didn't realize it was going to be a real debate. I've never done a debate in my life. Never in high school, never in college. Like, this is going to be bad. I think I'm just going to say, hey, I lose automatically. I'm just going to talk about John Carpenter.
What is it about Carpenter you love so much?
I like his style. I love like the sounds of his movies, the intensity. I don't know, because sometimes his stuff can go sort of far afield.
Yeah.
I don't know. Most of the time, you get the sense that he's committed to the story, and his characters are sort of committed to what's going on too. And for the ones that don't work, maybe sometimes the detriment. I don't know if that makes sense. There's also a sense of scope too. I don't know.
Let's, as we wrap up here, let's do some Halloween recommendations. So what, do you have any traditions? What does your family do? Do you have any things you guys do every year for Halloween? No. Is Halloween a big month? Is October a big month in the Tremblay house?
It is for me.
Yeah.
So my wife, Lisa, she introduced me to Stephen King. I mean, she read King when she was a teenager. After we had our kids, she went a long time where she couldn't see anything scary or remotely violent. Having the kids changed her. But eventually that changed because she was a big fan of the Walking Dead TV show and True Blood on HBO. So I mean, in some ways it's like it's not any different than the rest of the year because I'm usually always watching horror movies. My son was never really into the scary stuff. Like I sort of scarred him with my attempts to get him to watch scary stuff. Took him and a friend to see World War Z, and they didn't react well to it.
Okay.
I think they're like 12. My daughter is definitely more into horror movies, but our tradition used to be when we would go trick or treating. We had a neighborhood friends that we would, our kids were similar ages. We would, when they were really young, dragging them in wagons. When they were older, following them. So I miss that tradition because obviously my kids are too old for that. And we don't get very many trick-or-treaters at my house. So I guess my tradition is Lisa buys too much candy and I end up eating it.
Yeah, that tends to be the way it goes. I'd love to hear some of your recommendations. It doesn't have to be new stuff.
Yeah.
It can be anything you come across, movies, books, authors you want to promote.
Yeah, so maybe some off the beaten path movies. I don't know, like Lake Mungo for me is one of my favorite movies. My novel Disappearance of Devil's Rock is very much inspired by that movie. It's an Australian film. And it's definitely not like an in-your-face horror movie. It's more of a sort of a very slow burn creep, and it's presented as a documentary about a teenager who disappears, and it's the aftermath. It's all about like what happens to the family, what they experience, and there's something weirdly supernatural that happens. And it's both heartbreaking and amazing. I love the movie Ravenous, 1999. Guy Pearce, 1865, Western Sierra Nevadas. And it plays with the Wendigo myth.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say more recently, there's a movie called Saint Maud that I loved. That might be kind of hard to get, though.
I was gonna say, where do you find that? Is it?
Yeah, it was a British film.
Okay.
I'm sure it's somewhere.
You can get just about anything on Prime. You just have to pay for it. Yeah.
Oh, a more fun one. Well, Saint Maud is almost like the reverse exorcism. It's about a nurse who thinks she's being possessed by God. She thinks someone else might be evil. She thinks she's a vessel for God. So it's like it flips that script in a really interesting way.
Mm.
If you're looking for a more fun movie, I think its tone is so unlike any other movie I've seen. There are parts where it's like funny, parts where it's scary, parts where it's like you're very cringy, angry at what's going on. It's called The Wolf of Snow Hollow. A werewolf movie, but it's indie, very fun, very smart, and it centers around a sheriff who's struggling with alcoholism. And I had a friend who's an alcoholic say, I've never seen a movie that really got sort of the tornado of damage that the alcoholic causes, like when he's in a spiral. And it's the last movie, is it John Forsythe? That's not his name. Dang, I'm so bad with names. Robert Forsythe.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's his last film. But yeah, Wolf of Snow Hollow is on Prime.
Okay.
That's, yeah. I think that's like a good fun Halloween movie because there is some fun to it, but it is scary, but it's not like a goofy horror comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Session 9 too. I know you like Session 9.
Session 9.
It's 20 years old, but it's all local. If you like local stuff, it's awesome.
Yeah. Midnight Mass, the Netflix series by Mike Flanagan, especially for those of you who are Catholic or were Catholic at some point in your life. I think that movie's really going to speak to you in some interesting ways, or I should say a series. Everyone in my family's watched it. My mother, my sister, Emma watched it. She was in tears afterwards. I was like, oh, let's watch Session 9 now. That'll make you feel better, which didn't really work. And as far as books go, I would recommend Stephen Graham Jones. He's blown up as a horror writer. He's Blackfeet Native American, so he gets really interesting. Like he weaves a lot of the culture and lore into his books. Mm-hmm. Last summer was called The Only Good Indians, which is a work of genius. And he loves slashers, and his newest book is called My Heart is a Chainsaw. And it's this really wild sort of homage to slasher films.
Yeah. Indians, Paul recommended last year, and I read it. It's really good. It's different, but it's very good. Yeah. I
guess the last one for anyone looking, for those who like the big sort of gothic-y kind of novel, it's called Plain Bad Heroines by Emily Danforth. And it mixes queer politics with jumping back and forth. Like the past part of the story takes place at a girls' school in Rhode Island at like the turn of the 1900s. And it's fast forwarded to today where a younger woman who wrote about what happened, and they're trying to adapt that to a movie. So you get all these different stories weaving together, and
cool.
There are parts that it's really fun. It's also pretty creepy. It's also just very smart too.
Awesome. Okay, good. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions for Paul?
Yeah.
Survivor Song. I didn't realize. So my October tradition is to read horror, and I read The Golden Ghost last year.
Well, thank you.
It was great, and so actually stumbled on you from the book's subreddit. And I saw Survivor Song and saw the subject and was like, oh, okay, I must hate myself a little and want to think more about the pandemic, and so I just read that, and I didn't realize, I knew you were local, but I didn't realize how local. All the cities and towns, Brockton, Canada, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then lots of like hospitals, the actual names. Why did you change the name of Easton?
That's a good question. So there's some parts of that book, there's a couple of characters that appeared in my prior novel, Disappearance of Devil's Rock. And in that book, for whatever reason, I decided to change Easton to Ames. I think part of it was because in that book I maybe fudged some of the actual geography and maybe some of the part of Borderland Parks. I was like, I don't want to get letters from people saying, that's not really Easton. So I just changed.
Don't go on Reddit.
That was going to be the reason.
Yeah.
Because I live like down the road from,
Yeah.
and I'm reading this and like, wait a minute.
Yeah, but so people obviously around the area know, Ames, Oliver Ames, is connected with Easton. So that was part of it. And then because I was going to have a callback to that book, I just decided to keep it that way. But yeah, all the other places are all,
Well, everywhere else was exact names and like,
right.
Good same hospital. I'm like,
Yeah. Not only same hospital, so like, pandemic happens in the book. I mentioned a big chunk of it takes place at Norwood Hospital.
Yeah.
And you were there, or you saw it, or you were there, wiped out by a flood.
Yeah, I did a story last year, where it was at the same time I was reading the book because it had the flood. Yeah, it was.
I didn't flood. I burnt the hospital. I didn't flood it.
Yeah, they're gonna. I think they're gonna tear it down at some point and rebuild it. I don't know.
Yeah.
When? That was a good question.
Yeah. Well, thank you for reading those.
Yeah.
No, and I totally understand. People who didn't want to read Survivor Song during a pandemic. I didn't want to read it during a pandemic.
I mean, I've read every one of your books as soon as it's come out. One before it came out.
Yeah.
And that was one, I got through the first chapter now, and I can't do this.
Yeah.
And it took me till this summer, and I got through it this summer. It's a wonderful book, but I just...
Yeah, no, the thing that's been cool about, obviously we're in a much better place. Well, we're in a better place. I guess maybe not say much better place. I'm finding like people have read my books, I waited till a year later to read the book, and the response from those people I've enjoyed that response, because most people have been reporting back to me, it's like, I waited to read this for a year because I couldn't handle it, but I definitely found like a measure of hope, or I took a measure of hope from your book, which, it's doubly weird because when I wrote the book, I didn't think it was very hopeful, but that was pre-pandemic.
Right.
I can totally see why people, and I agree, I do think there's a measure of hope in the book after having been through, what we've all been through.
Mm. How do you think people are going to look at that book 10 or 20 years from now?
I don't know. Who knows if they will look at it. I don't know. There's only like a handful of people, maybe even less than 5, that read the book before the pandemic came out, which is when I wrote it, right? So I sometimes I wonder, obviously I would much preferred, for many millions of reasons that the pandemic not happen. Sometimes I wonder, geez, I wonder what the reaction to the book would have been like if none of this had happened. I don't know.
Okay.
Is there something about Massachusetts that just sort of lends itself to writing, or Stephen King, right? Everything's in Maine. That it really draws a lot of inspiration.
Right.
I know you're from Massachusetts, but does that
draw? There must be. I have to be fully honest, admit that like part of it is, I don't feel comfortable. I hate doing research. I'm not good at it. I was never trained in doing it. So for me, oftentimes the setting is like, I'm going to set it in the place that I know. But at the same time, why not use Massachusetts, New England? Because you get to have the best of both worlds. There's already a set of, you already have with most readers, there's already a set of expectations that they have. Oh, this takes place in New England. It's the creepy Gothic place. And it's fun to either lean into that or to undermine that, right? There's so many ways you can play with it. It definitely does become like this self-perpetuating thing. Lovecraft, King, even Emily Dickinson's creepier poems, this area. In terms of the country's age as a country, this is the oldest area. So I don't know. There's that. It's old and it's pretty densely populated, but we still have a lot of space. We still have trees and parks and places that we can get lost. And I don't know, it's always interesting to me, I'm not sure why, why do I feel more unsafe when I'm out in the middle of the woods as opposed to, being around thousands and thousands of people? It probably pretty clearly should be the other way around, but for whatever reason it's not. Maybe it's a natural thing, maybe it's, all the folk tales that we know and have heard growing up. It's probably, some combination of the two.
Could you describe a little bit about the writing process and if it's different for every book, or how do you do what you do?
It's sometimes different. Like I try to make it feel different. Like even if it's just to fool myself, like, oh yeah, this book is different. But I don't want to make it feel too different because I want to be able to say, oh yeah, I've done this before, so I should be able to do it. But typically, I haven't done this for every book, but usually I'll start with, if I have an idea, I'll go to a notebook first. Even though I don't write longhand, I take a lot of notes and just maybe write some bits about the characters. And for most of my novels, before I wrote page 1, I took a few weeks to a month or maybe more just to try to write like a 10-page summary of what I think happens, just a plot summary. Because I feel the least confident in plot. I'm always, as a reader, I'm more interested in character and vibe and voice and tone. I feel more confident as a writer that way too. So for me, the plot's the hard part. It's like, I can't make that up as I go. I have to have some sort of plan. And the fun part is when when things change. Typically, I'll have this plan, but then like the last half or the last third of the book will change. Sometimes a lot. But I haven't done it for every book. Like A Head Full of Ghosts, I didn't do a summary, even though that's probably the most intricate in terms of like the moving parts. Again, I felt lucky with that story; just sort of like fell into my lap. But every summary is different. With Survivor Song, I really only summarized like the first 100 or so pages because that was the most research heavy. And sometimes I'm forced to, like to try to get a new book deal with my publisher. When the book deal runs out, they say, okay, we want to know what's next. We can offer you a deal, but we need 30 pages in a summary. So sometimes I'm forced to do that. Like I did that with the Pall Bearers Club, which is fine. Like I don't mind having sort of the scaffolding. I know some writers hate that. Stephen King claims to hate having that. Ramsey Campbell, British writer, loves.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to be surprised. I'm like, oh.
Stephen King doesn't know where he's going all the time.
That's what he says.
You don't believe it?
Oh, no, I do believe it. I'm not going to call it.
What would you recommend for somebody who's starting out, a young person or an old person who wants to start writing? I know there's no blueprint. Everybody's different.
Yeah, that's
but
you got to find what sort of works for you.
Yeah, but what would you just to start out and get started?
Just a little bit every day. Like it doesn't even have to be that much. I mean, even now, honestly, like there are times in the year where I can get a lot of time writing done. But honestly, most days, I'm lucky if I get an hour, hour and a half of writing in. And I might miss 1 or 2 days a week.
Do you have a page quota?
So what I try to do is, my aim is like 500-ish words a day. If I'm in a novel, 500 words a day. And then I think about the week. And realistically, I'm going to miss the goal a couple days, might miss a day. So if I can get like 2,500 to 3,000 for the week, I feel good. The more accurate goal for me tends to be the monthly goal. Like, okay, if I can get 10 to 12,000 this month, I'm feeling good. I think it's important for me to have goals that I can make, because most of the time I'm beating myself up like, this is terrible, you stink. I wish those feelings would go away, but they never do. In fact, I feel like it's getting worse. But I always feel good if I make a deadline. Typically, as I get closer to the end of the book, the word counts go up. And then what I'm addicted to isn't the writing. I'm addicted to having like a finished thing. Not because I'm finished, but like I'm proud of it. Like, that's the feeling I'm addicted to. Is like, look at this thing I did. Like I'm really excited to show it to people. And it's weird because the week before I'm like, this is terrible, I hate it. But once I have it done, I'm ready to fight to the death for it.
Do the doubts drive you?
Yeah.
When you have those doubts, do they drive you? They obviously don't beat you because you have some wonderful books that you've produced.
I don't know if they definitely don't drive me. Well, maybe that's not true. They might drive me to be like, I'm going to stick through it even if I think this stinks and get to that 500th word, and then I'll feel better.
Yeah. Because I'm sure there's millions of people who have started writing and then quit and say, I can't do this, and then the self-doubt wins.
Yeah. No, it's just always a marathon. And even though I've written like, 8 or 9 novels at this point, it's always like when you're in the middle of it, it's like you can't see the end. Like, man, how did it ever end before?
You're just pushing the rock up the hill.
Just one day you're there. Even if it's 300 to 400 words a day. I mean, if you did 500 words every day, that's 180,000 words. That's a lot, especially for me. I write 80,000 word novels. You just be surprised, just the little accumulation. And like, just by doing it every day, you train yourself almost subconsciously to do things. And it's weird how you inadvertently do it sometimes. Like, I used to love writing in silence, but as the kids got older, they'd be doing their own thing. But the house is sort of open, it's noisy. I don't have doors in my writing area, so to shut noise out, I have to put music in. So now I've sort of subconsciously almost trained myself. Okay, I need the music now. I feel like my body subconsciously trained me to have my best ideas in the shower, which is weird. I swear, like when I get up and take a shower, and if I'm thinking about a story, I solve so many problems in the shower. But I know because it's happened once or twice, my brain believes it. Like you train your brain like it's a dog. I'm not joking. Like Kelly Link, who's a National Book Award, Pulitzer Prize nominated, she writes horror sometimes, and she said you have to treat your subconscious like a dog, like in a good way. Because like if your subconscious brings you ideas, and you're like, nah, that's a dumb one. No, I'm not going to do that one. Like if that was your dog and your dog was bringing you a toy, and you said, no, not now, not now, the dog's going to be sad and not bring you your toy anymore. Your brain works the same way. So like if your brain brings you something, you have to reward it. Like, oh, like you don't have to write the novel of every idea that you have, but at least take it, turn around, look at it. I don't know, those are things that I've been doing it long enough that I'm conscious of, is to, to take those ideas and, let them swim around. When I'm not writing, like if I'm driving, I'm always thinking, especially if I'm in a project, I'm always thinking about the book. So I'm doing a lot of sort of working while I'm not working. Did I answer the question? That was a really long answer, sorry.
No, there was good stuff in there. That was great. Any other questions? You guys have anything else? All right. Mr. Paul Tremblay, thank you. That was great.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I know it's, for a lot of people, it's not like an in-person event. This is like my second one, too, so yeah, a little bit nervous, but thank you for coming.
And books in the back, right?
Books in the back. And before we go, though, I want your horror origin story. You asked for mine. Because Jason's a big horror fan.
Oh,
That's
okay.
how we met. Like, he read a Survivor song, and he wanted to interview me, for his Boston News. And in his background, he's got like a Halloween poster. He's got a Friday the 13th shirt on right now. He's a big horror fan.
Yeah, I am.
We'll end with, I want to know what your horror origin story is.
All right, quickly. So yeah, I did a story on him. When I found out he was local, I was like, I got to talk to this guy. And then there was the pandemic connection. I was like, oh my God, because every story last year was about the pandemic. So yeah, that's how I met Paul, and we became friends. But so let me think. I was always a weird kind of like lonely kid, but I always loved this stuff, and I can't explain why, but my earliest memory was Halloween, and I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I was playing soccer at a kid's house across the street from my house. And I hated soccer. Sorry, Paul. I still, soccer's not my favorite. So I kind of drifted away from the game, and I was looking through the window of my friend's house. His parents were inside. It was a Sunday afternoon. They were watching Halloween. So I was like, what is this? So I'm sitting in the window, and it was when Michael Myers is chasing Laurie across the street. So by the time I got home, I told my dad to turn it on. And this is how I remember I'm young, because I was sitting on my dad's lap watching the movie on TV. So I get him to turn it on, and by that point, Michael Myers was in the house. Laurie had told the kids to go in the room. He starts chasing her, right? So I'm sitting there on my dad's lap, and my dad goes, do you want me to turn it? I go, no. And he starts coming in the room. Laurie goes to the closet. She shuts the doors, right? Do you want me to turn it? No. Michael Myers starts punching through the closet, right? And the light comes on. You can see his mask really for the first time. Do you want me to turn it? I go, yeah, turn it now. So as soon as he starts punching through, put on football or whatever it was. I was like 6 or 7. That was my first. I was way too young to watch Halloween, even edited for television.
Right.
There was a babysitter I had a couple years later. I was probably 8 or 9. USA used to show on Friday the 13th, on the calendar, Friday the 13th days. USA would have Friday the 13th marathons, and I was just, I don't know, I just love this stuff. I love comic books. I think there's probably some kind of heavy metal music. It's all kind of related, right? And then, of course, Stephen King's the gateway drug. And you discover Stephen King in middle school, and then the whole world opens up. And you start diving into all kinds of good stuff. And that's my horror origin story.
Wow, wild. It's funny, like some parents will argue like, oh, like if you, I don't know if it's based in any science at all, but like if they see something scary and you stop it, it can almost sometimes be worse because they don't have they don't have the conclusion. It's worse you had afterwards.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, but
Laurie did live, though. You're right. Yeah. No, I think this is the last thing I'll say, this is why I defend this stuff, is because I think it's cathartic, and we're not suppressed. Right. When you go through this experience, there's a catharsis, and you're not suppressed. You kind of get rid of that stuff. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. But thanks for coming out, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it was fun.
tell me the sitting on the lap story? Did I ask about that?
No, I don't think so. But that's
amazing.
100% true story.
That's amazing. Creeping outside the window.
I don't remember how old I was. I just know I'm small.
Yeah. That's great.